Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Welcome to a great conversation as part of New Zealand Tech Week. I'm Vanessa O'Neill and I have the fantastic role of being the New Zealand Trade Commissioner based here in Victoria. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Boonwurrung people, traditional custodians of the Great Bay of Port Phillip, where I am today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on the call today and other Indigenous groups who may have joined us from New Zealand. I have the pleasure also of introducing the second of a series of jointly hosted events with Global Victoria. So it's great to have our trade agencies working together again. As you know, Victoria is a sports-mad state that punches well above its weight in the big event stakes. Melbourne has a large and diverse sports tech ecosystem, absolutely high quality sports infrastructure, and an internationally recognised sporting events program. In fact, Melbourne is home to 65% of all Australian sports tech companies. So of course it makes sense that it's the headquarters of the Australian Sports Technologies Network. Most recently, one of my highlights has been attending the Women's T20 World Cup, where Governor Linda Dessau kindly hosted our very talented White Ferns at Government House. And even earlier, we have to mention that Boxing Day test, where many Kiwis made the pilgrimage over on Christmas Day to play at the MCG. And despite the outcome, a great display of sportsmanship, and who knew Kiwis could sing so well? There's no doubt that sports brings New Zealand and Australia together frequently, and what is a currently challenging time with COVID-19, we were given a small celebration early on with our joint FIFA Women's World Cup bid being successful for 2023. What a fantastic event that's going to be. So sport is in both of our countries' DNA. It makes great sense that we leverage our knowledge trans-Tasman and we continuously develop technology and work together to bring the best in class innovation to the world. I think it was Launch Victoria who did some insight reporting and saw that the opportunity in sports technology was that it's expected to grow by 93.8 billion in 2027. In 2018, it was 27.5 billion. So if those numbers aren't a call to action, I don't know what is. So if we look at the trends that are happening in sport at the moment, Deloitte identified 5 key ones. The rise of women's sport, which is great. The continued evolution of esports, fantastic. Legalised sports betting, athletes maximising their short-term value, 5G and sports in the cloud. So on that tech front, we're seeing emergence of new technologies and athlete performance recovery technologies, such as wearables, coaching platforms, and recovery. And we've got 2 of our panelists right in the heart of that space. We're seeing stadium performance technologies improving, such as venue services, tickets, safety, security, and of course, those key marketing and sponsorship metrics getting involved. And then lastly, fan engagement. And we've seen a lot of it most recently with a lot of Victorians at home enjoying live streaming and content delivery. So it's a great thing we have our panelists this morning showing some leadership across those areas already. In terms of Australia, Australian exports in sport technology is around 500 million for 2018. 2/3 of that is in Victoria. So we're in the right spot. Today's format, we have 3 panelists who are going to share their stories. At the same time, we are joined by my co-host, Adrian Percy, who's from Global Victoria's tech team, and he's going to be capturing and curating your questions as we go for the later part of the discussion. After the Q&A, he's going to wrap up with some closing insights, which will be great. So let's get underway. Shannon, I'm going to start with you at Rostify. I'm really keen to know a little bit about you, where the idea came from, and I know your personal motto is always challenge the ordinary. So has that come into your way of doing things at Rostify?
Thanks for having us, guys, and thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, absolutely, it is, and I think everyone's motto in small business and starting something up would have a very similar motto. You wouldn't be doing it if you didn't want to just settle with the ordinary. So absolutely, it's at the heart of everything our company does, and I'm sure my co-panelists would agree with that. So Rostify, for those that aren't aware of what we do, we're a white label workforce management technology business, and we work with some of the world's largest events, charities, universities, cities, effectively as a way to connect their community And we cover every single step of the workforce journey from original registration, screening, background checking, all the way through to scheduling, communicating, and reward and recognition to make sure that your volunteers and paid staff are retained and run a successful event. So that's what we do. And hopefully a few stories along the journey we can share today.
Fantastic. Look forward to it. Some great organising behind the scenes, of course. So Ed, tell us a little bit about CSX. You've had a couple of different roles. I know you've actually been involved in a lot of different startups, including some altitude simulators. So tell us about yourself and where CSX came from.
Thanks, Vanessa. So I guess my background is in sports technology. Sports. I used to be a sports physio many years ago now, and predominantly in rugby. So I spent a lot of time working with elite rugby teams with the Fiji Sevens guys and teams out of Wellington, but sort of had enough of that after a while. So tried to figure out ways of putting, I guess, what I knew from sports and what I liked with technology together in the sports performance world. So altitude training was my sort of first business, and we sort of developed that technology and took it to the States, but maybe it was a bit ahead of its time. And CSX, I started when I was actually living in the States, came up with the concept, was designed to make a wearable to measure forces that travel, through the brain as you play sport. So that's how we started. It was about 5 years ago. But very quickly in the development process, we realized we were going to have a lot of data. So we made an app to get the data, and the business very quickly morphed into 99% of what we do now is in our app with the questions and answers that are asked when we're screening for concussions. So if a rugby player or an AFL player or an NRL player goes off and they're having an HIA, they're all going off and using CSX to do their concussion screening.
Look, I think it's a really important part of sport, and health and wellbeing comes first. I'm sure there's a lot of team coaches, managers and teammates that put a lot of focus onto your product, as well as parents at home. It's everyone's biggest worry, I think, the concussion space. So fantastic that you've been leading the way, that's for sure.
Cool.
Now, Bowden, CATAPULT, you're quite advanced in terms of where you're at. You're in 24 locations. You're working with 300 elite teams globally. I was looking at your list of clients, and it was a pretty impressive role book. Tell us about yourself and CATAPULT.
Yeah, so sorry to correct you, 3,000 clients around the world.
Sorry, correction.
No worries. So CATAPULT was born out of a partnership between the Australian Institute of Sports, or the AIS, and a scientific research organisation. So at the time, the AIS wanted a way to measure athlete movement and exertion during competition, and not just within laboratories. The only way to really do that was through wearable technology, so GPS and accelerometer technologies. So our eventual co-founders worked with a guy named Alan Hahn. So some people might know him as the sort of godfather of sports science in Australia. They engineered this world first wearable technology designed specifically for team sports. So that happened back in 1999. It was used exclusively by the Australian Olympic team for a while. So in the 2000 Olympics, and then lead up to the Athens Olympics. So we didn't commercialize until 2006. Since then, now work with over 3,000 teams. Still have a Melbourne headquarters. We're publicly listed on the ASX here, but our relatively new CEO is based in Boston, and the vast majority of our revenue comes from North America and the UK now. We've only got about 3% revenue coming from Australia. So quite a global business. I was lucky enough to join as employee number 12, and now we've got about 350. So exciting journey to be on.
Fantastic. And I believe you've just had a great milestone in the last month.
So last week we announced to the ASX that we're cash flow positive, which was an exciting business story and has made our share price go up in a tumultuous economic climate, which is a good piece of news. So a lot of hard work that's gone into that, and very proud of that one.
Sure. And I'm sure there's a lot of participants who will be on that line watching and actually saying, when are we going to hit that? That's nirvana for a lot of tech companies in that space. So congratulations and well done. So we depending on the attendees that we've got, we're going to peel it back a bit, and we're going to go right back to the very start. So Shannon, tell us about your commercialization story. Give us a bit of insight as to how you evolved as a business.
Yeah, I think it's important to note we started Rostify by running another business here in Australia, and that was a company called Event Workforce, which is a staffing company here, placing staff at the Australian Open at Grand Prix. And through that experience, we realised the need for technology to streamline our processes and make sure that our workforce were getting the best experience possible. And in 2015, that's when we realised the need for Rostify, and we launched that as a business. And to be honest, we had no intention of that platform being commercialized. It was very much to solve our own problem internally. And then it was friends of ours in the industry saying, hang on, we could use this thing. Can we get access to it? And our first response was no, because that would mean they wouldn't need our staff and we'd sort of eat our own business. So I guess how we then decided was commercializing, we could make a bigger impact around the world through technology. So we decided to go all in on Rostify, and I guess the commercialization of that was two things that we did. We asked the customers well, firstly, this is a problem. How much would you pay for it? And that was very honest conversations with our friends at the time that would be our clients. And then the second way was trying to then work out some metrics of saying, well, by using a platform to do these things, you should be saving X on your headcount that would previously have been sitting in spreadsheets doing this. So this is how we believe it should be priced up. And then you can't be too vain with your pricing. You can't be too stuck to a price when you start out, because the most valuable thing is customers that can then put you in touch with others. So to start out with, listen to the market, ask questions, don't be naive to the fact people only pay what the value they perceive in it as well.
Look, I really like how you quantified your value proposition early. I think that's something often organisations really struggle with. And listening to your customers and getting that insight, how did you actually go about that?
Yeah, quite simply, we just needed to work our asses off to build a reputation. And the only way you build a reputation is by doing a great job. So we were often giving the platform away for free or next to nothing. Like we laugh at what we were charging in 2015, but had we not done that, we'd be sitting back being a bit naive to the fact that no one owes you anything when you're a startup. You need to prove it yourself. And then through proving success, Netball World Cup in Australia was actually, funnily enough, our first major client. And through them, we got recommendations to speak to others, because there's nothing like a warm introduction when you're starting early. Because like I said, no one owes you anything. All you can go off is good word from others that are in the space, because it's trusted.
Fantastic. The other thing you mentioned was pricing. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of people listening when they're looking at how do they actually put a price or value on their products. How did you go about identifying that pricing strategy?
To be honest, we still haven't nailed it. We've been running for 5 years, so don't beat yourself up if you haven't. You just need to do the best you can. In a way, we probably started and still are too expensive in a way, but I'm happy that we are, because it's very difficult to go the other way in starting super cheap and working your way around. Sure, the early days you need to build your testimonials, almost throw them out the window in regards to, oh, that's going to be our price moving forward, because you need them to start with. But then once you've picked up a few clients, you build a reputation, then that's when you can start to build your value. And a way that we did that was looking at what else is out there in the market. So what's the other option? Either they'll do it themselves internally, or they'll go to a competitor, look at what the competitors offer and work out where your value sits from there. And we believe our platform's the best in the world. So we really do price at that level. So yeah, that's kind of how we start. And then where it ends up is in 5 years down the line, which is now. Only just 2 months ago, we launched what we call Rostify Rapid, Core and Enterprise, 3 different levels of our platform that come at very different price points, because again, you can't be naive to the market to expect everyone can pay a premium price. But don't give away your platform for cheap just because they can't pay for it. Give it a reason as to why it should be cheaper. And for us, that is by giving less functionality or options which as well, it's what customers need. We're probably guilty of providing a Death Star, a humongous solution to those that just needed a way to register volunteers and communicate to them. So we've really stripped down some of our offerings and have that as a standalone product now that can be at a cheaper price point. And we're seeing a lot of success out of that, which is great.
Fantastic. And I think the evolution into the MPD space we'll talk a little bit about further down the call. So Bowden, you're quite advanced, as you said, you're listed. Tell us about your commercialization journey.
Yeah, so to go back to our starting story, so we had that 7-year period where it was just used by the Australian Olympic team. So after that period, there was already some demand for the technology before it was even commercialized. So we had a bit of runway towards launch because it was already on the backs of, I didn't really explain what the technology was, but most people think of CATAPULT as the little device that goes on your back and it measures speed and distance and a whole host of metrics. The company is expanding pretty rapidly to more of a platform of solutions. So we have video analysis tools, athlete management platforms. So there's quite a bit that goes into it. But at the time, it was just that wearable device. So the problem we had early on with commercialization was we took 7 years to commercialize because we had this exclusive partnership with the AIS and the Australian Olympic team. But during that time, another company beat us to market. So they're called GP Sports, based in Canberra. So they created similar technology during that period, beat us to market, quickly snatched up most of the AFL. But then within 2 years of commercializing ourselves, we had most of the AFL ourselves and then went on to acquire GP Sports in 2014. So we had the last laugh there. One of our product directors is actually still with us and he's from the GP Sports team and I still bring up that story all the time. But we made a conscious decision pretty early on to price at a premium level. And to Shannon's point, like no one has figured out pricing. It's very much a case of just finding out what people will pay for it. It's similar to selling your house. If someone's going to pay $1 million for it, then your house is worth $1 million. Sometimes it's as simple as that. So we positioned around tying to injury mitigation and tying that to a team's return on investment. So if they're paying us $50,000, we need to demonstrate that they're going to get at least probably 5 times that value from the money they're going to save if they keep someone on the field a little bit longer, especially star players. So I guess if there's one takeaway tip around pricing is, yeah, no one's got to figure it out, but also tie it to what the team's going to actually get in terms of their investment that they're making. And again, like Shannon said, it's much easier to move downstream than it is to move upstream. You can always make it cheaper. It's harder to make it more expensive later.
Exactly right. I'm hitting hard with the pricing discussions coming out so early, but I thought I'd pick it up while we could. Hey, Bowden, you talked a lot about going from a device and then actually you said we started off as, you know, a wearable device. Now we're actually a platform with services. What was the tipping point? Because you've kind of obviously developed yourselves and disrupted yourselves along the way.
Yes, the biggest tipping point came soon after I joined the company. So early 2013, we made the decision to become a SaaS business. So obviously selling products on a capital sale is, I shouldn't say easy, but it's fairly transactional and straightforward. But to get people to pay you on a monthly basis and I guess stay an ongoing customer it's a different positioning challenge, but one we felt like we had to make sure every time you wake up in the morning, you've got money coming in the bank, whether you're selling or not, basically. So we moved to become a SaaS business in 2013, mostly with our wearable technology, but soon after we made acquisitions of the North American leader in video analysis. And from there we had the sort of the performance side and then the tactical side. And in order to use those products, you had to subscribe. So instead of just buying our devices, you pay a monthly fee per athlete per month. And then you basically have access to our platform. So that's helped scale us quite quickly because, like I said, you've constantly got money coming in, and if anything, it forces us to continue innovating. Because if a company is sort of locked into paying us monthly, we're locked into ensuring that they're happy to re-sign after 3 years. So you're continually making your technology better. Whereas if you're just doing a one-off sale, it's, like I said, a little bit more transactional. They've bought it, they now have it, and you sort of don't care if they're getting value out of it because they've already made the purchase.
Vanessa, if you wouldn't mind, if I can just jump in there,
Yes,
it's from someone that's we've run our business for 5 years. We just raised our first investment at the end of last year, and I presume some startups and other companies will be going through a similar journey to ours, hopefully one day. And that's, to Bowden's point, it's really important about going, are you an enterprise sort of once-off sale business, or are you a SaaS-based business? And our example, we started off probably pretty enterprise level, selling a one-off license to Super Bowl each year. We'd have to resell. But then when you start speaking to investors, they're going, but what's the value? What's the multiple on a 1-year contract? Because next year, your value is zero, because you're going to need to resell again to everyone. Whereas SaaS-based, the monthly recurring is what any investor is going to be looking at if you're serious about raising investment and creating value to investors as well. So I think it's really an important one to have in the back of your mind from the start of your journey about what type of business are you building.
And so, Shannon, you've raised it then, and it's a really important point, raising investment. How did you, I guess, looking back now, what are some of the lessons you learned about what you did well and what you could have done a little better?
Look, I'm conscious of taking everyone's time. We could talk for a day about it, but probably the key things are, ours probably took about 9-10 months to close. We probably spoke to 50 different people. What are the key learnings? One would be, people can talk the talk, but it doesn't matter until you see a contract. So don't get ahead of yourself and put all your eggs in one basket. Get to contract stage as fast as you can, because that's when you see the ratchet clauses and the random things that you've never heard of before. Get good lawyers that can understand things that you may be missing, that have been through investment for tech especially. We probably learned we had lawyers that were just lawyers from generic fields, and they weren't aware of the fields that sports tech and technology lawyers would be aware of. So I thought that was important. And then thirdly, get someone that you can work with and understand with, because once you're with them, then you're with them for the long term. So you don't want someone that's going to be painful to work with, or that is, if they're putting out warning signs early in the investment, then even they might have all the money in the world, but it could be the worst thing you could ever do, because you still run your own business. And this is important. You still run your own business. You make the decision to run your own business to enjoy it as well. So if that investor is going to be a real pain in your backside, asking you questions, doing reporting every second week, then you might be setting yourself up for more trouble than it's worth.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. Now, Ed, tell us about your commercialization process. Tell us about CSX Concussion and where you're at currently from where you started.
I guess ours is a little bit different, because we focused on the elite only. I guess a little bit like Catapult, but we've only got elite customers currently. So we went straight into World Rugby and did a deal with World Rugby for all elite rugby globally. And then out of that flowed England cricket, New Zealand cricket, and the NRL, and then the AFL joined sort of in that process. So I guess that was how we've gone about it so far. We've developed new products which we had planned this year to then make available and take to the mass market. But obviously that's probably been delayed until next year. Now we're waiting to see when community sports at a level where we can sort of go back in and do that.
And tell us about the team that you've got, where you started, you know, in terms of, was it just you, the typical story of you in a garage? Have we evolved from there? And then how did that grow in terms of bringing on resourcing and as you were growing?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of good ideas, but I've got no skill in terms of developing tech or writing code. So I had to find some people. We did start making our wearable in a garage, and then when we sort of had, okay, well, this concept's going to go somewhere, we brought in engineers, and then we got into the software engineers. And I mean, we're still a very small team. There's only 4 of us. So we have a hardware engineer and a couple of software guys that mainly deal with all our our apps and our web-based product as well. And then because we're small, we use specialists in certain areas where we need certain skills as well. we're not big enough yet to sort of fill some of these things internally, and we don't need all those resources all the time. So it's a case of let's go out and grab skills when we need them for a short amount of time, instead of sort of having them sitting on the shelf.
And how do you get that in terms of, as in the early stages of commercialization, how do you get that balance right between build and sell in your team? You know, you've got that rapid prototyping, insight coming. How do you get, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't think we did, probably. We just built. We were working with World Rugby. I guess there was no, we took a paper-based system and turned it into a digital system with a bit of smarts behind it. So we sort of had to create and figure out how to do this. And so it was all, I think for the first couple of years, we're just chasing our tail in terms of, right, develop. But we had users already using the product. So we would, take some feedback and quickly make a change and go and do it. But they were, they were a good partner to start with, because they were paying for some of that development as well. But now when we bring in new people, we'll develop their products that they specifically want, and then we can deploy that. So we can manage it a little bit more effectively now.
Fantastic. I think resourcing something that we'll probably cover again just later on in some of the Q&As as well. But when we talk about global expansion, what was the turning point, Shannon, in terms of going global? And how did you know where to start in terms of markets that were attractive?
Yeah, it's the chicken before the egg situation. Do you set up staff in a market and then pick up clients off the back of it? Or do you pick up clients there first, prove the demand, and then set up your staff afterwards? We did the second option. We picked up, funnily enough, it was Tough Mudder, I think in 2015, 2016, who at the time are one of the world's fastest growing event businesses. We picked them up as a client for the worldwide technology solution. And at the time, there's three of us sitting in not even in an office, freaking out, thinking that we're going to have to be up at 3 a.m. every morning dealing with things. But that's the option that we went down, the route that we went down. And then off the back of that, signed the Super Bowl pretty early. And then we realized, hey, there's a market there that we can then set up staff in that market. So that was the option we went with. And to be honest, I believe it's the best way, because otherwise you're a small startup. You don't have the money to be employing someone to be sitting around, poking around, especially in somewhere like the US, you just get lost. If it was somewhere, you'd be going smaller UK potentially, that is maybe more friendly to and easier to navigate around London potentially. That's my opinion.
I like how you say we just picked up the Super Bowl and then we just got some staff, and everyone sitting, I'm sure, watching this will be saying, how did you pick that up? What was that process in terms of winning them as a customer, and then actually putting staff into market is often hard as well.
Yeah.
How did you go about that?
Yeah, I certainly don't mean to make it sound easy. But the biggest lesson out of all of this is that, like I said at the start, the only reason we picked up Tough Mudder and the only reason we picked up Super Bowl was actually from our personal references, that people knew us, knew that we would execute, we would do what we'd say we would do, compared to the technology. Both those contracts, we had probably 60, 70% of what they needed, but they trusted us as people and as I guess, individuals, that we would get done what we'd say we would. And so building that rapport and trust with people, and the only way you do it is by proving yourself on working in similar environments, and building your own personal network. So I understand there's a few questions there around, like, how do you do it? It's simply about proving yourself. You need to work your ass off to build trust in yourself as a person, because even now, 5 years down the line, speaking to the FIFAs, UEFAs of the world, yes, the technology speaks for itself, but it's also on the reputation of the business, which ultimately is your reputation as people as well. And I'm sure the CATAPULTs of the world, probably now more the product speaking for itself in a way, but that's definitely, I'm telling people that because of most startups that are here, that's how you build your reputation, because again, no one owes you anything or your product anything. They just need something that's going to work and solve a problem.
And Shannon, that's a excuse me, that was a great handball to Bowden, because I'm super keen to hear the same answer from you, Bowden, in terms of what were the markets that were particularly attractive, and how did you navigate it?
Yeah, so like born global, die local, that gets mentioned at pretty much every sports tech event I've been to in Australia, especially. The idea that Australia is such a small market, and to have a successful business, you need to be successful overseas, quickly permeates everything. Everyone with an idea to commercialize in the space pretty quickly. And I'm sure it's the same in New Zealand. So the decision to go global was an easy one for us. The process was pretty region specific. So for most of Europe and Asia, we partner with distributors, referral partners, instead of putting people on the ground. The advantages of doing that, you're skipping a lot of steps. So you're putting your products in the hands of people with local distribution, relationships, and most importantly, trust at teams you're trying to sell to. So you can sort of skip the onboarding process, finding the right person, language barriers, and all the rest of it. The downsides, obviously, is that it can be a negative for your brand, which we sort of experienced in the UK initially. So our very first distributor, I guess I can name them, they're called Perform Better. We've still got relationships with them, but their color palette sounds like a small thing, but they were green and black, and Catapult's always been very orange. And everything that went out about Catapult was all green and black and had their logo on it. And no one really knew what Catapult was. It just looked like another product in their catalog. So you do have to be very wary of those things. But then the upsides is like they could sell to anyone because they had relationships with every Premier League club. So it's just trade-offs with pros and cons. For the US, we moved one of our Australian sports scientists over there and just really threw him in the deep end. He was sales, support, inventory. He was everything for us. We followed up pretty soon thereafter and hired a salesperson on the ground who was also Australian. And then I moved over there shortly thereafter. Once we had a couple teams under our belt, before we knew it, there's the team of 3 grew to over 100, and then we had like over 1,000 teams in North America pretty quickly. One thing that we benefited from at the time, the Moneyball movie had come out relatively recently. Sports data, analytics, sports analytics, like that was a really blossoming industry in the US specifically, like the MIT Sloan conference, that was really starting to flourish. And we saw this sort of convergence of sports science and sports analytics, and Catapult sort of perfectly sits at the intersection of those two things. So we really helped drive those waves into each other. And one thing we really benefited from was that there was a lot of Australians moving from AFL and NRL clubs over to the US. So our first sales to like the New York Knicks was like an ex-Premier League user. Houston Rockets had an Aussie there. A lot of our early sales were relationships from Australia that were able to leverage. And the good thing about the US is once you've got a couple clients, you can grow pretty quickly because they're so competitive over there. Like everything's a competition. No one wants to be left behind. So if you can show and demonstrate that you provide a value for one team, you just need to leverage that story, and word spreads pretty quickly.
But while you're talking, I think it's great in terms of you're expanding the distributors. You've got ambassadors, Australian ambassadors that are hitting the US at the same time. You'll be getting feedback from your live customers. How have you evolved your R&D to remain competitive? I can imagine everybody's got an idea because everybody's giving you feedback across multiple parts of your business. How have you evolved that?
Yeah, so there's obviously constant pressure to make sure your R&D is sort of ahead of the curve. So we released our latest wearable tech device last year. It's called Vector, which is our 7th generation device. So since our 6th generation device was released, there's probably 30 competitors that popped up in the space. So the industry had sort of changed in between releases for us. So we had to go beyond what our customers were expecting us to release. So as you get bigger, you also need to think bigger. So we're not really a hardware supplier anymore. We're sort of always selling hardware on a capital sale to sports scientists. So now we're selling more solutions that live inside a platform to athletes and teams. So instead of big innovations to remain relevant, we've moved more to a constant innovation sort of cycle that solves problems. Because there's really no point releasing anything that isn't being demanded by a market, so either explicitly or inherently. So I think we've done a much better job listening to what teams need and sort of taking a hint in where the workflow gaps are, and then creating a solution that fits that, rather than coming up with this huge product release and trying to be seen as the R&D leaders. I think what customers care about is solving problems. So listen first and just create something small that solves a problem, and then just go from there.
Fantastic. But Generation 7 sounds pretty exciting in terms of development and complexity. Ed, tell us a little bit about CSX. How do you do it in terms of evolving yourselves and ensuring you're staying at the front of the curve?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite similar. We work very closely, mainly with World Rugby, I guess. They do a lot of research on all our data for us, which enables us to sort of, I guess, shape the forms that these concussion assessments take. So, I mean, like before the last World Cup last year, we actually totally redid our whole app. And that took our last 4 years of learnings and sort of took the advice. Every doctor's got a great opinion that they want to tell you. So we put all of the ones that we thought were useful in talking to World Rugby and our other elite partners, and develop for that. And then what we do is we take a lot of our learnings from dealing with the elite, and we've worked with New Zealand Rugby to develop a model that will take the understanding of what works in the elite level and put it in a format that will work for the mums and dads. So I guess we're driving everything. We're constantly enhancing, I guess, the existing product instead of pulling it all apart. But making sure that we're not just developing for the sake of developing. The main thing is, is this going to be beneficial? If we add this new feature and we spend the time doing it, are we actually going to get a financial return? And if one customer wants it, is that actually enough to warrant driving an R&D process?
Yeah, look, I think what I love hearing from all of you is that the R&D is very much in partnership with your customers. And so it's keeping you pretty close to them and at the forefront of what they need, which I think is absolutely critical. I can see, Shannon, have you got a couple of thoughts on that?
I think it's, we still wrestle with it day to day with our product team thinking they know the answers more than the customers. And it's, once you have an established product, it is so difficult to make sure that customer feedback is at the core of everything you do. Otherwise, developers, especially if you're building technology, it's very easy to just start building stuff, and the horse can get away from the cart in that sense. So you just need to have your customers at the heart of everything. However you do it, it's up to you guys, but very important.
I think the other thing that we do is we don't let we as a company don't let our developers drive the R&D hugely. Like we left it to them, it would be a square box with a button in the middle, and it would be, yes, it would do what it needs to do. So we're driving it from, I guess, having stood on the sideline at rugby games and things like that. Would this work for me? Not does it work from a tech point of view? Does it work for me as the end user, which is a little bit different in some cases because we're not letting the engineering drive it.
That sounds like a great win, Ed, because I know it's a constant struggle of having tech engineers not constantly re-engineering their own products.
Oh, they love a square box.
Look, I think we've covered a huge amount just in those opening remarks, and I'm conscious we're going to have some fantastic questions that have been coming in, and some already, thanks to those who have sent them early. So I'm going to throw to Adrian, who's going to now captain some of the questions that have come through. Adrian, over to you.
Thank you, Vanessa. So yeah, some great insights already from the guys. So really huge thanks for that. So we've got a few questions that have come through via the registration process from some of the attendees, and we've got a couple that come through live here. So I'll aim to get through as many as we can given the time. So. And I'll direct to the individual as appropriate. But what I'd like to start with, probably a very hot topic across the board, is the COVID situation globally. Now, I might throw to you first, Shannon, being a event-based business and understanding that events are globally being hit hard and postponed and the like. So, how's the response from your end been and how you're dealing with it?
Yeah, I think first port of call was check in with our customers, make sure that they were okay. Customers value how important they are in times of toughness and hardness as much as it is in easy times. So I think that was really important to us to make sure that they knew we were there to support them. Secondly, was checking with our internal team, making sure our staff understood it. Lots of changes. We had to reduce some hours down. We had to lay some staff off, unfortunately, but we're now back to full time, our whole business, which is great. So it was probably navigating those two things were the most important. And then third, it was looking at revenue projections, going, what's a reality here? And just dealing with reality, because there are some people that are unrealistic as well, going, well, no, there's no excuse. You still need to be hitting your numbers, when that's not going to be the case. And then I think the last point is that, and this is all hindsight's an amazing thing, but we really diversified our business probably 2-3 years ago away from just events and Super Bowls and once-off to being a very SaaS-based business, with probably over 50-60% of our revenue now coming in from universities, charities, other sectors that are not solely reliant on events. So our business has been fine to get through this period, but it's that were the two things we got out of it, was look after your customers, make sure they feel the love, and also look after the internal team, because they're the ones that drive everything.
Yeah, fantastic. And Bowden, from you guys, have you seen a hit? Have you had to change things?
Similar to Shannon, so touched base with the customers right away. Made a few internal changes. Luckily, we didn't have to let anyone go in the company, but we did have some salary cuts just for a small period, and we're all back to 100% now. A big focus for ours was sort of understanding this new sports landscape and what it actually meant for our customers. So obviously, all the best teams in the world, their athletes are working out at home instead of working out together. So what were their tech requirements? Because speaking to like a Premier League team, for example, they went from having a team training that had 25 players all at the same time to those 25 players were all training at home at different times, but they're still doing relatively similar workouts, and they still need to report that back to the coach. So how can we help from a tech perspective sort of manage that workflow? So we released 3 products or solutions the last couple of months just to help with that process. So our wearable technology, we introduced an app, which meant the performance coach could just send the devices out to the players. So to use the Premier League example, they had their device at home, they did their pre-assigned workout wearing the device, take it off, it automatically syncs with their app on their phone, and that goes up to the cloud, and then the coach has all the data coming through. So from a workflow tech perspective, it was really well appreciated by the performance coaches, because their job didn't change, even though they didn't leave their house. So we really helped out the guys that way. And then 2 other quick ones. We introduced a player proximity report that just uses our normal tracking data, but it shows with a sort of a red-green traffic light system whether an athlete is within 1.5 meters of a teammate, just to measure incursions. So that was a thing that some soccer leagues actually mandated to use when they return to training. It's a bit of a fluffy solution in some sport. Like you think about American football, they're tackling each other, they're in each other's faces. So it's kind of irrelevant. But for soccer, it proved quite important, because if there was a player that tested positive, we had like a report that would show how much time they were within a certain space of athletes. And then the final one, we introduced a wellness report that could identify the symptoms of COVID-19 relatively early, which was built into all of our products. So little things like that we prioritized that weren't originally on the roadmap. So just being flexible and agile in the solutions that we're putting out there that were a little bit customer driven, because those are the things that they asked from us, and we tried to deliver.
Yeah, fantastic. And just highlighted the point there of being very adaptable in a different market and adapting your product and services. And last one to you, Ed, just quickly, if you've got some insights in that, given what you've experienced.
Yeah, I mean, we had to sort of cut the staff back on their hours. We probably lost most of our forecasted revenue from the community game that we were starting to target this year. So obviously no community sports. So a large forecasted revenue hit. And then while we had no sport going on, there's obviously concussion risks are greatly reduced. So there wasn't a lot of lot of action for the system. So we just really use the time to sort of develop new solutions for our community product that we will be launching. So just made sure that we've done that. We've done a lot more testing, and really just trying to plan how we're going to come out of, I guess, the COVID and how we can hit the markets. And it's a bit of a moving beast with the community stuff, because even in America they don't know where they're going to be or when, and in England. So what we're trying to do is be ready to go to those markets when they do come out.
Yeah, fantastic. Good. Right, moving on, and I'll start with you, Bowden, on the next one. What do you think the growth areas and future trends are in sport tech, around hardware, data and analytics, sports management systems, that type of thing?
Yeah, good question. So I think one thing that we're starting to see is a bit of a consolidation in the sports tech space. It felt like when I started at CATAPULT, there's sort of an influx of very specific technologies. So we came out with essentially a team-based GPS technology. And then you'd see sort of a similar thing specifically for soccer, or when VR got really big 4 or 5 years ago, there was VR for this and VR for that. Like, it got quite specific. And then there was a bit of an influx of middleware sort of software layers that pulled everything together, which has sort of ebbed and flowed that part of the industry. But I think one thing that feels like the next wave is the consolidation of and professionalism of sports technology in general. We're starting to see a lot of high profile VC money coming into the industry. And one thing venture capitalists like to see is who are the big players? They don't like to see fragmented markets, and sport technology has been quite fragmented the last 10 years. So I think we're going to see, I don't want to say less startups and less sports technology companies, but I think we will see all of those companies working together in some way. Because I think one important thing, if you're a startup and you're visualizing your technology being used at, let's say, a professional rugby team, they're not going to be using your technology in isolation. It needs to work with whatever is already in place, and they've probably already got 5 to 10 pieces of technology in place. So whatever you're creating, whatever you're going to market with, that's going to be part of an ecosystem within a team itself. So when I say consolidation, I don't just mean big companies buying small companies. I mean everything sort of has to work together for the betterment of the customer at the end of the day.
Yeah, fantastic. I'll jump to you, Ed, on that. What are you identifying as trends in your space?
Well, I think Bowden probably summed up pretty well. I think in our space, concussion specifically, I don't think there is any one piece of the puzzle that is going to help doctors or parents even manage people who get a concussion. I think we want to be taking data from a number of different places and putting it together to make an informed decision. So, our app is one bit, our wearable, linking that to video footage, and if you put it all together, can we then sort of, with a bit of machine learning and a bit of AI, actually customize delivery of concussion management based on, we know you took this type of impact, this much load, these are the answers you've given after the game. So your tailored approach to management would be along these lines. So I think taking bits of information from lots of different places, putting it all together is really what people want. And everyone just wants to know more about themselves. So everyone wants more data, it seems. So the more bits of the puzzle they can get hold of at all levels, from the elites down to 10, 12-year-olds even. They want to know how far or fast they've run, and they want to know all this sort of stuff. So I think that's where it's going to head.
I think we've seen a lot of that. We've seen, obviously the professionals getting access to a lot of this technology, and it's filtering down to the more grassroots level, wanting to have that same piece of technology or access to that same information. I think we've seen that trend sort of starting to emerge. Shannon, anything?
2 points. One is around the best-in-class offering. I think now there are a lot of nimble specialist businesses and technologies that are around, and similar to us in workforce management, where previously for the Olympic Games, as an example, they would have one tech platform that would do everything. but it would do everything at about 50 or 60%. But it was the fact that it could share information across accreditation, uniforms, transport, logistics, workforce. That's why it was good. But what can happen now is that the best-in-class solutions can integrate with one another and share that data, similar to what Bowden said. So that's a positive sign for SportsTech and smaller companies coming up, that as long as you can integrate and importantly understand the importance of integrating with others, don't be naive to the fact that you are very good at what you do, so they should just pick you. You need to understand where you sit in the larger picture. That's one point. The second point is more a broad topic around investment. Is a lot of people have been speaking to have suggested that investors basically are writing off this year. Because if you do extremely well, then how are you going to sustain that? Because a lot of companies have maybe pivoted to something that may not be sustainable or needed in 6-12 months time. So your numbers, sure, they might look great at the end of this year, but are they actually going to look good in 3 years time? And similarly, you might have been doing really well coming into the start of this year, and then you've flattened out this year. Fair enough. And so how can you make a good judgment off a good or a bad year this year? Not to say you shouldn't be doing well, but it's I just found it interesting, and hopefully the startups that are here, that's an interesting point that we learned.
That's actually a really, really good point, identifying that, don't jump onto what you're necessarily doing now in a COVID-specific environment, and don't jump off something just because it's not working in a COVID-specific environment when you're planning your future. I think that is actually quite critical.
Yeah,
right.
We needed to do that big time. You could easily get distracted and try and jump on the next nearest thing, but my opinion is you've built your business for a reason. Stick to it and stay strong with it. And if you need to reduce and bunker down for this period, do that and focus on your product. Similar to what Ed said, spend the time doubling down on your product and what you're good at. That is, of course, unless your industry's destroyed because of COVID, things will come back. We just need to adapt and do the best we can, but don't lose sight of why you started in the first place.
Yeah, really, really good. Conscious of time, I'm just going to maybe point a couple of questions to an individual to get through a couple more. I might jump to you right now, Ed. The question came through to you. For an app-based tech aimed specifically at players, would you recommend targeting end users first or overarching sports associations for endorsements? What are your learnings?
Well, we went to the top down. It gives you credibility. It gives you something to point to. But obviously it's not always easy to get the top. I think it's an easier way of going than otherwise you've got to go after each person individually, which is hard going. And then you need a big marketing budget and you got to go and find these people and convince them to use a product which they may not know about. So from our point of view, I can go along and I can say to, the mum of a 10-year-old who's got a concussion, this is the same product the All Blacks use, or AFL clubs or whoever, and the kids go, okay, so I've got that instant credibility, so I've got the overarching league or sporting body using it. So that was the way that we did it, and are planning on continuing to do it. But I think if not, I would go, like when we go to America, we'll be going ideally to regions and going top down again, schools, even if it's just a school, and then get direct access to the players and their parents, instead of going to try and get everyone who goes to a school. We're going the other way.
Yeah, Adrian, fantastic. A very quick point on that from our experience is about getting one club, building a case study and showing it to the overarching body. Because otherwise, and I'm sure Ed's had this experience, you can waste a lot of time, 6, 12, 18 months trying to get the top body. And when you're a small business trying to get revenue through the door, you need to still get some wins on the board. So building that case study from something that's maybe more achievable to start with to then prove to the top body, that's still ultimately the goal. That's for us personally, that's what's worked.
And you did mention before, Shannon, as well, you talked about a little bit just having the right sort of relationships and building your brand and credibility is nothing beats that. Working at trying to get clients. Right, moving on quickly, and I'll go to you, Bowden, just for this one. Just addressing the issue of sort of gender balance in sports tech, which has maybe previously been a more male-dominated industry. How are you planning or have addressed that in the past?
Yeah, so I think that's something that every sports tech company is conscious of and is making efforts to help fix. So we have issues internally, like I said, like most companies do. We're making great strides towards balancing out, especially gender diversity, but not just gender. It's an ongoing project at CATAPULT. One thing we've implemented somewhat recently is whenever we hire someone new, the final 6 candidates, 50% of them have to be female. So we're not going out and saying like we need our percentage of female employees to be this, because then it just creates different issues, and we're still at relatively small, 350 people. To swing the percentage significantly, we'd have to basically ban hiring men for a year. So we've gone sort of taken a step back, saying that women just have to be in the 3 of the final 6, just to make sure that the people we're looking at is a little bit more balanced. We've also have a partnership with Women in Sports Tech, so WIST, which is a US-based organization. So it's quite a content-heavy partnership that we have with them, but a lot of it is just sort of shining a light on women that do work in sports technology, or even in performance roles at teams, because a lot of the time their stories aren't told, and sort of they just get sort of lost in the fray, and people just assume there aren't women working in sport. So helping to highlight and profile the people that are really elevates them. And we've found that to be beneficial when we're at events, and we're talking about the MIT Sloan conference. If we come across a female data science graduate from Harvard and she's asking, how do I get into the industry? And she's seen that we've profiled this high performance manager that works at an NBA team. It motivates her and gives her sort of a blueprint to follow. Whereas even 5 years ago, there probably wasn't that blueprint in place.
Fantastic, great. Conscious of time now, I think we'll leave it there in terms of the Q&A. And firstly, want to thank all the panelists for their great insights throughout the session. I think the attendees have been able to get a great number of ideas for their own businesses. And also I want to thank the guests for taking the time to listen here. Just before we end up, it'd be great just to acknowledge the New Zealand Trade and Enterprise and Global Victoria for putting this event on, and also Vanessa O'Neill, the New Zealand Consul General and Trade Commissioner, for attending and hosting the session for us. Did an amazing job. It's like you've done it before. Just before we do finish up, and this has come from Victoria here. The Victorian government, through Invest Victoria department within the government, that aim to assist and attract foreign companies to sort of set up or integrate into Victoria. And as Vanessa mentioned, it is the heart of sports tech here in Australia. What we will do is send out some information to all the attendees that have tapped in today. But Invest Victoria is essentially part of our department that will offer assistance for companies looking to merge into Victoria by offering some inside business connections, introductions to key partner suppliers and that type of thing, and even give you the opportunity to work through some of the financial and regulatory issues that you may come up with coming into Australia. So we've got a slide up there, so just to give you some ideas. And if I just get to the next slide, which will just give you some contact info. So feel free to drop us a line, send us an email, or connect with us. So any of you New Zealand companies and others that might look to Victoria as a place to get in contact and see if we can assist you. But on that note, I'll say thank you to you all. Have a great day. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you got a lot out of it.